I built a life brick by brick, until my best friend and my wife decided to steal it. But they forgot one thing. I'm an architect. And I don't build anything without a plan. Jason Whitaker stood silently at the threshold of his house, watching as the police cruiser disappeared down the street. The call had come about an hour earlier, right in the middle of him going over final revisions for the Holloway estate, a $20 million property that would have locked in his firm's legacy in Newport's elite architectural circle. "Mr. Whitaker, we need you to come home immediately. There's been an incident," the officer had said over the phone, his tone so neutral it gave nothing away. Jason replayed the words in his head, still trying to wrap his mind around the situation. He dropped everything, meetings, calls, deadlines, and driven home with a growing knot in his stomach, imagining the worst. Maybe a robbery, maybe an accident, or something had happened to Emily. Now inside the house, just past the foyer, the air felt unbearably heavy. Emily was seated at the edge of the couch, her makeup smudged from tears that hadn't stopped. Her body trembled with quiet sobs. Jason's parents, who had flown in from Chicago for a short visit, lingered by the fireplace, looking deeply unsettled. His mother twisted a tissue in her hands, while his father, once a hardened army colonel who rarely let emotions surface, stood pale and speechless. I remember standing there trying to understand what I was seeing. My father took a step toward me and gently gripped my arm. "Jason, she didn't mean for things to go this far," he said quietly. I pulled my arm free. "What are you talking about? What happened?" Emily looked up at me, her face filled with dread. "Jason, please?" "I can explain," she said, her voice barely audible. Then came something that made my blood run cold. My wife murmured, "Don't let him go into the garage." But I was already walking past my mother's outstretched hand. That garage was my personal sanctuary, custom-built with care, complete with epoxy floors, tailored cabinetry, and a corner where I handcrafted miniature models of my architectural visions. It was more than just a space. It was a part of me. There was something in Emily's voice, a raw kind of fear I'd never heard from her before, that drove me to open that door. When I did, the sight hit me like a punch to the gut. The garage looked like a war zone. My workbench had been ransacked, models I had poured months into were shattered and strewn across the floor like debris from an explosion. But that wasn't what made me stop dead in the doorway. Across the far wall, where I used to proudly hang my design awards, there was something new. Dozens of photographs had been carefully arranged in rows. At first I couldn't make sense of it. But as I stepped closer, the faces in the pictures came into focus. There she was, Emily, with someone I knew all too well. Daniel Morris. My best friend since grade school. My business partner. My brother in everything but blood. The pictures told a story I had never been meant to see. Quiet, candlelit dinners on nights I'd been working late at the office. Weekend getaways Emily had told me were girls' trips. And even worse, photos from inside our home in our own bed, taken when I'd been traveling to pitch clients. But it wasn't the betrayal alone that left me numb. What chilled me to the core was what surrounded the photos. Taped alongside them were printouts of blueprints, familiar ones. My blueprints. These weren't just any drafts. They were the heart of a project I'd spent 3 years refining. A sustainable skyscraper concept that I believed could redefine urban architecture. The one design I'd shared only with a trusted few, and that was meant to be my legacy. Pinned beside the images were email exchanges, long threads between Emily and Daniel. They weren't just having an affair. They had been plotting. Plotting to claim the entire concept as Daniel's own, to rush a patent under his name, and pitch it to Archer Development Group, the crown jewel of commercial developers. They were going to take everything I built, I murmured, barely recognizing my own voice. I didn't hear my mother come up behind me until she spoke, her voice soft and unsure. "The neighbors called the police," she said. "They heard a commotion, glass breaking, loud shouting. Emily was smashing things after she and Daniel argued. Apparently he's pulling out of whatever scheme they had. He told her he wants to come clean. Maybe even make things right with you." I slowly turned away from the wall. The anger in me wasn't loud, it was silent, steady, and terrifying in its calm. Emily took a step back the moment she saw my face, like she'd seen something shift in me. "Jason, please," she whispered, tears spilling again. "It wasn't my idea. Daniel told me you were dragging us both down, that we could be so much more without you." I stood there for a long moment, just taking in the damage. My workshop, once a space of order and imagination, was now a scene of chaos. Shards of my models were scattered like broken bones. Years of passion and meticulous work lay crushed beneath my feet. Then my eyes returned to her, Emily. The woman I'd fallen for back in college. the one I built a life with. And now, the same woman who had spent God knows how long tearing that life apart with the man I trusted most. Leave, I said quietly. Jason, please. I said leave. My voice didn't rise, but it was firm, unshakable. The room went completely still. You've got 30 minutes? Pack only what you absolutely need, I told her, still not looking directly at her. Everything else stays. It's mine now. Without another word, Emily turned and ran upstairs, her sobs echoing faintly through the hall. I felt my parents watching me. My father looked uneasy, which was rare for him. Son, he said carefully, what are you planning to do? I crouched down and picked up a jagged piece of a model I'd loved, a design for a community center I'd donated to a struggling neighborhood, something I'd poured my heart into. I'm going to do what I've always done, I said almost to myself. I'm going to build something flawless. My father furrowed his brow. You mean start fresh? The divorce? A new life? I set the model fragment gently on the bench, aligning it like it still meant something. No, I said quietly. I'm going to design their collapse. And unlike them, I'll make sure it's built with absolute precision. The next 3 months moved like clockwork. I filed for divorce, but I didn't rush it. I didn't want anything sloppy or emotional. I stepped away from my firm, claiming personal reasons, which Daniel accepted with rehearsed concern and that smug little glint in his eyes he probably thought I wouldn't notice. What neither of them realized was that before Emily had a chance to clean out the garage, I had photographed everything. Every blueprint, every incriminating email, every image that exposed their lies and scheming. I had the evidence tucked away where no one could touch it. But I wasn't planning to use it the way most people would. They're expecting me to go nuclear, I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the clink of glasses and low murmur of the bar. I was sitting in a dim corner booth across from Naomi Phillips, an investigative journalist I'd met at a networking event years back. She was sharp, relentless, and most importantly, she had no ties to Daniel or Emily. Daniel knows I've got enough dirt to ruin him. His name, his firm, his entire future. He's waiting for me to take the first swing so he can come back with a counterpunch. Naomi took a slow sip of her bourbon, her eyes steady on mine. So, you're not going to do what they expect? No, I said, leaning back slightly. I'm going to flip the script. They'll never see it coming. The wheels were already in motion. First, I reached out to Archer Development Group. I offered to design their upcoming high-rise for a fraction of what the top firms would normally charge. It was a bold move but calculated. Daniel had booked a pitch meeting with them for the following month to present his so-called revolutionary concept. The very one he'd tried to steal from me. I had to get ahead of him. Mr. Whitaker, said Lenora Archer, the company's CEO and granddaughter of the firm's founder, peering at me from behind her sleek, minimalist desk. Your proposal is, frankly, much lower than I'd expect from someone with your resume. Why? I gave her the kind of polished smile I'd mastered over the years. Because I'm not chasing money anymore, Ms. Archer. I'm focused on building legacy projects, developments that shift how cities live and breathe. Your firm believes in that. I want to be part of something enduring. She nodded, though a faint note of skepticism lingered in her expression. And your partner, Mr. Morris, is he involved in this? I kept my tone even. Daniel and I are heading in different directions. We've had creative differences. What I didn't tell her was that I had engineered my proposal to mirror just enough of Daniel's style, strategic design flourishes he was known for. Just enough to make it look like he had plagiarized me, not the other way around. When he'd present what he thought was a masterstroke, it would look like a clumsy imitation of something I'd already submitted. It was elegant, subtle, and brutal. And next it was Emily's turn. After we separated, Emily moved in with Daniel. But things between them weren't as perfect as they'd hoped. Daniel believed he'd step right into my role, take over my clients, win over the industry, carry the same weight I did. But it didn't work that way. Without my relationships and reputation to lean on, the doors started closing fast. And Emily, who had once pictured herself as the sophisticated wife of a rising architectural star, was beginning to feel the cracks forming beneath that dream. The reality didn't match the fantasy, not even close. So I staged a coincidence. It happened at the little cafe we used to go to every Sunday morning. I made sure to arrive early, looking just tired enough to seem overworked, my tablet in hand, casually reviewing blueprints as if the world outside didn't exist. Jason? She said, approaching slowly as if she wasn't sure she should interrupt. I didn't expect to see you here. I looked up, feigning mild surprise. Emily. You're welcome to sit if you'd like. She hesitated for a second before sliding into the seat across from me. "How've you been?" she asked, glancing at the screen on my tablet. "Busy," I said simply. "The Archer project's been demanding. It's taken up most of my time." I made sure to drop that name like it was an afterthought. Just enough to make her stop breathing for a second. "You're working with Archer Development?" she asked, blinking. "Yeah," I said with a shrug, eyes still on my screen. "Things move on, right? How are things with you and Daniel?" She looked down into her coffee, buying time. "Good, fine. We're adjusting." I gave her a gentle, reassuring smile. "That's great. Really. I want you both to be happy." That line had taken weeks to perfect. Polished, delivered without a trace of resentment. It was designed to confuse her. And it did. She stared at me for a few seconds, like she couldn't decide whether she was being comforted or quietly gutted. "Why aren't you angry?" she asked finally, her voice small. "You should hate us." I let a soft, almost sympathetic smile touch my lips. Hatred requires emotion. I've moved those emotions elsewhere. And with that single line, I watched something inside her shift, some part of her self-worth flicker and dim. I stood, gathered my things slowly and walked away, leaving her sitting in silence, coffee cooling in her hands. "I should get going," I said, standing up and offering her a polite nod. "Take care of yourself, Emily." I left her there, a little lost, her expression unreadable. But I knew what I'd done. The doubt had been planted, small and subtle. She would go home to Daniel and start asking about the Archer project. And with that, their fragile trust would begin to unravel. Step 3 was more intricate. Through Naomi's network of contacts, I arranged for a respected industry blog to publish a subtle leak. The article hinted that Daniel Morris was developing a groundbreaking new sustainability concept for urban high-rises. It was light on detail but heavy on hype, designed to generate buzz around Daniel's upcoming pitch to Archer Development. On the day of his big presentation, I stayed home. Calm. Unbothered. Everything was in place. When the phone finally rang, it was Lenora Archer herself. "Mr. Whitaker," she began, her voice professional but clipped, "I believe we need to have a serious conversation regarding intellectual property." Feigning confusion, I replied smoothly, "I'm not quite sure what you mean." She continued, "Your former partner, Mr. Morris, just delivered a presentation using designs that are remarkably similar to what you showed us weeks ago. He claims they're entirely his own, developed over the last 3 years." I let the silence hang as if I were truly trying to grasp what I was hearing. "That's troubling," I said slowly. "What exactly are you implying?" "I'm not making any judgments just yet," she said carefully. "But our firm values transparency and honesty above all else. I'd like you to come in tomorrow. We need to discuss this further." After I hung up, I poured myself a modest glass of scotch and stared out at the city skyline. Everything was unfolding exactly as I'd drawn it up. Daniel had walked right into the web. To Archer he now looked like a thief. But the real brilliance of it all hadn't even happened yet. Because tomorrow, instead of defending myself, I would present evidence that painted him as innocent. At least, at first glance. The ambiguity surrounding who had stolen from whom sent ripples through the industry. Archer Development hesitated, uncertain. Other firms, watching from a distance, began to pull back too. No one wanted to be caught in the crossfire between two prominent architects tangled in a controversy with no clear villain. With both reputations now suspended in doubt, I was ready to execute the fourth, and most damaging, phase of the plan. The conference room at Archer Development had all the weight of a courtroom. Lenora Archer sat at the head of the long glass table like a judge, her sharp eyes betraying little. Daniel sat across from her, visibly tense, beads of sweat gathering at his collar. Behind him, Emily kept a careful posture of support, but even from the doorway I could see it was starting to crack. I entered last. No briefcase. No documents. No flash drive of proof. Just a quiet nod to the room as I took my seat. "Mr. Whitaker," Lenora began, her voice neutral but firm, "thank you for coming. We seem to have found ourselves in a rather complicated situation." "Indeed," I replied evenly. "Although, perhaps not as complicated as it appears on the surface." I let the words hang there before continuing. "Daniel and I worked side by side for years. We built ideas together. Refined each other's thoughts. When you work that closely with someone, it's natural for ideas to overlap." Daniel's head shot up. This was not what he expected. This wasn't the confrontation he'd spent the night preparing for. "So you're saying," Lenora said carefully, "that you don't believe Mr. Morris intentionally plagiarized your work?" I gave a small shrug, just enough to imply neutrality. I'm saying that creative collaboration can be messy. And I've known Daniel since we were kids. His character isn't something I'd condemn easily. The atmosphere in the room shifted slightly. A bit of the edge faded, though no one relaxed. Daniel looked at me, cautiously relieved, unsure whether he was being spared or baited. Lenora, still pressing, asked, "Then how do you explain the overlap in your designs?" I met her gaze without blinking. We shared research, conversations, countless iterations. I imagine we both pulled from the same pool without realizing how closely aligned our final drafts had become. I saw the doubt in her eyes, but also a flicker of something else, interest. Ambiguity had its uses. I offered Daniel a warm smile, measured, deliberate. Maybe, in the chaos of everything that's happened personally, there was just a bit of confusion over who contributed what. Emily stared at me like she was seeing a ghost. Her face couldn't mask it, disbelief at my apparent grace. That was exactly what I had planned for. I wanted everyone unsure of my motives, questioning whether I was letting it all go or plotting something deeper. "If I may," I said, turning to Lenora with calm confidence, "I'd like to suggest something a little unconventional." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing, giving me space. "Rather than let this situation stall an important project, or derail 2 careers, what if Daniel and I collaborated one last time? A joint proposal that blends the strongest elements of both our visions." The room fell into silence. Daniel's face was a flicker show, confusion, curiosity, cautious hope. "That's generous," Lenora said carefully. "It's not about generosity," I replied smoothly. "It's about practicality. This project matters more than our egos." With a nod and the faintest trace of uncertainty, she agreed to consider it. The meeting ended on a strangely optimistic note, clouded by questions no one had the courage to voice. Out in the hallway, Daniel caught up to me. Emily trailed behind him, quiet and unreadable. "What is this?" Daniel hissed in a low voice. "What are you doing? Since when do you share credit?" I met his stare with a relaxed smile. "People evolve, Daniel. They learn, they adapt. Isn't that what you used to say I needed to do?" He squinted slightly, trying to see through me. But he couldn't. Not anymore. I had become exactly what the situation required, a master of appearances. "We'll need to plan the pitch," I said, keeping my tone light. "Come by my place tonight at 8. We'll lay the foundation together." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. Emily said nothing. But I saw it in her eyes, that growing uncertainty. She had no idea what I was really thinking, and that unease was exactly where I wanted her. That evening I prepared my apartment down to the finest detail. The lights were low, the atmosphere just right. A bottle of wine uncorked and breathing. Everything in its place. Everything was laid out carefully on the coffee table, files stacked with surgical precision. Soft instrumental music floated through the apartment from discreet speakers. The space was warm, calm, inviting. Every detail had been chosen for effect. At exactly 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I took one last breath and opened it. There stood Daniel, and to my mild surprise, Emily beside him. "I hope you don't mind," Daniel said, his tone stiff. "Emily has some experience with sustainability metrics. Thought she could add something useful." It was a poor cover. He didn't trust me, and he'd brought her as a buffer, hoping her presence would keep things in check if something felt off. "Of course," I said easily, stepping aside. "Please come in. Make yourselves comfortable." They settled awkwardly on the couch while I poured 3 glasses of wine. I handed each of them a folder, the kind of tidy, professional packet you'd expect for a design meeting. What neither of them noticed was the detail I'd built into each one, a tiny, nearly invisible USB drive embedded in the folder's spine. "Before we dive in," I said, raising my glass, "a toast to new beginnings and old friendships." We clinked glasses. The wine hit their lips, but neither looked relaxed. I set my glass down and leaned forward. "Now," I said, my voice calm but clear, "let's talk about why we're really here." The air in the room tightened instantly. Daniel stiffened. Emily held her wine glass just a little too tightly. "Inside your folders," I continued, keeping my tone conversational, "you'll find everything. The original designs you stole from me. Your emails, discussing how to edge me out, how to sell the work under Daniel's name. There are also photographs of your relationship dating back 2 years." Daniel's jaw clenched. Emily looked like she'd forgotten how to breathe. "But more important than any of that," I went on, "is something I uncovered recently while going through old files." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What kind of game is this, Jason?" "It's not a game," I said, offering a small smile. It's a reckoning. Then I dropped the real blow. Do you remember the Peterson Heights project? The one that put our firm on the map? He nodded slowly, guarded. Well, during my review I found something. Serious structural issues, ones that could have become catastrophic. And guess what? The engineering approval has your signature. Daniel went pale. That's a lie, he snapped. The building passed every inspection. Because you falsified the data, I said, voice steady and low. While reviewing our archived files, I found the original engineering reports. You altered the load-bearing calculations to make it look like everything met code. But you never added the actual reinforcements. That building is slowly coming apart, Daniel. I saw Emily's eyes dart between us, her carefully composed face beginning to break. Daniel, is that true? He didn't answer. You didn't have to. 400 people live in that tower, I continued. Families, kids. And you were willing to endanger all of them to cut costs. What, shave off 8% of the budget? Just so happens to be the same amount you transferred into that little offshore account in the Caymans around the same time. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed again. You can't prove any of this, he finally said, but his voice was hollow, cracking around the edges. I already have, I replied, nodding toward the folders in their hands. The documentation's in there. So are my communications with the district attorney's office. They're quite interested in construction fraud and negligent endangerment these days. Daniel exploded. He lunged across the table, fists clutching my collar. You self-righteous traitor, he spat. You'd blow up everything we built, over one mistake? I didn't flinch. I just looked him in the eyes, the same eyes that once belonged to my best friend. No, Daniel. You blew it all up the moment you decided my work and my wife were things you could just take. Emily was crying now. Not silent tears either, the kind that choke the breath and shake the shoulders. Jason, please, she said through sobs. Think about what this will do to everyone. There has to be another way. There is, I said gently, prying Daniel's hands off my shirt without force. Also on those drives is a contract. It states that Daniel transfers his full stake in our firm to me, along with a written confession about the stolen designs. But it doesn't include an admission of guilt in the Peterson Heights case. That part stays quiet, for now. In return, I said, keeping my voice even, I'll take care of the structural reinforcements at Peterson Heights myself. Quietly. Discreetly. No one gets hurt. Daniel stared at me, the color in his face nearly gone. And if we say no, he asked finally. Then I release everything, I said softly. To the authorities. The media. And most importantly, to the people living in that building. You'll be charged with fraud and criminal negligence. You'll go to prison. I glanced at Emily. And when the joint accounts are seized, Emily loses everything too. Every dollar. Every promise. Every illusion. I stepped back and opened the door. Daniel paused there on the edge of the hallway. His eyes were distant, his voice hoarse. So, what happens now? You leave, I told him. The agreement includes a global non-compete. You don't design again. You don't practice. You don't contact Emily. You disappear. And if I don't? I met his eyes with a faint smile. Then I finish what I started. It's your decision. But make no mistake, it's the only one you have left. He didn't say another word. He just walked out. Later that evening, I stood by the window, watching the city glow beneath the amber tones of the setting sun. Alone. At peace. The building I had once envisioned, the sustainable masterpiece, had already made headlines. It had won global awards. Pushed new standards into building codes across 3 states. My name was attached to it now, forever. I heard a soft step behind me. Lenora Archer joined me at the railing, holding her own glass of wine. It's beautiful, you know, she said, gazing out. Your vision. Brought to life. I nodded. It always feels right when a design is executed exactly the way it was meant to be. Just then my phone buzzed with a notification. A news alert. Victoria Whitaker has officially filed for divorce from Daniel Morris, who is now living quietly in a seaside town in Portugal. No public statements have been made. And that was that. The architect of a flawless revenge, standing beneath a skyline I helped reshape, a city now shaped in part by my resilience, my pain, and my precision. This is where my story ends. I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment if any part of this spoke to you. And if you appreciated the journey, subscribing to this channel would mean a lot. Thanks for taking the time. And so, it all came full circle. Not with a courtroom battle. Not with shouting matches or dramatic takedowns. But with quiet precision. just the way I'd always approached my work. I didn't get back the years I lost, the love that was betrayed, or the friendship that turned to ash. But I reclaimed my integrity. I rebuilt my name. And I watched from a distance as the people who tried to dismantle me faded into the background of a life they never really earned. Emily's silence said everything I needed to hear. Daniel's absence spoke even louder. I didn't seek revenge out of spite. I sought clarity, resolution, and yes, justice. Now, when I walk through the city, I see parts of myself etched into the skyline. Not the broken man who was betrayed, but the man who took every shattered piece and reassembled it into something unshakable. This wasn't just about architecture. It was about design in its purest form, of truth, of consequences, of survival. Thank you for following this story. For listening. I hope it reminds someone out there that no matter how badly you're broken, you can rebuild. And sometimes the most elegant structures rise from the ruins.